Sometimes my point of departure for a weird sword lady research rabbit hole is just a random picture I found on the internet and that intrigued me. And today this is the intriguing picture in question. A woman who looks like she's from late 19th century, early 20th century, on a bicycle with a sword, aiming it at a target. Yes, we have an Edwardian lady bike jouster on our hands, and we just have to ask why, how, when, what's the context? So hop on your bike, horse, or any other mode of jousting transportation and let's find out together. Connecting the dots from jousting to bike jousting to ladies on bikes while jousting, which will also lead us to the delight that is a comic with lesbian motorcycle jousting involved, with an interview with the creator of S.I.R, Fell Hound. Now, jousting is usually portrayed as two people on horseback, on different horses, not both on the same horse, speeding towards each other with big pointy lances. That's the usual setup that we are accustomed to, and we know that it's, a medieval fun time, essentially. But outside of the usual horsing around, could also encompass a lot of things on and off horseback. And one of these things was thrusting your lance at something other than your enemy's lover's situationship, so, an object, an inanimate, non-moving target. This is the quintain, which basically refers to a series of lance games that were initially seen as training for the actual jousting against somebody else and then actually just developed into their own thing. But you may be thinking, how entertaining is it to just look at a bunch of people on horseback aim at an inanimate target, or in the case of a specific game called Running at the Ring, aim their lance at a ring situated up high target-wise and then run away with it? Well, these tournaments found ways to make it interesting, with not only a set of theatrical antics surrounding it, but also quite a lot of high camp, our favourite on this channel. Because like other tournament games from 16th century onwards, they often form part of a series of festive events called the Masque. And a masque is basically a big, immersive theatrical experience that could contain singing, dancing, theatre, jazz hands, probably not, but pretty much everything in terms of music, in terms of art, in terms of elaborate set design, that was all meant to create this big kind of performance festivity to celebrate a particular event. So essentially, pretty much probably the best outlet that a Renaissance queer theatre kid was ever going to have. And when I say they went all out, they really went all out, and they even sometimes employed architects to help with the actual set design for these masks, which were, due to the whole extravagance involved and the cost and just them being used as these displays of power and wealth, were all happening in a courtly context. And yes, given that what we know about these masks shows that they were really kind of incorporating every single element of the festivities into these big thematic theatrics that could often also involve the main players of a tournament. And nothing represents that best than costume designs created for masque incorporating a tournament in Prague in the late 16th century by Giuseppe Archimboldo, also known as the guy who created the best prompt ever for art teachers everywhere, how to make a portrait based on a bunch of fruit or vegetables or books or whatever he can get his hands on. In terms of composite portraits made from very much non-human elements, Archimboldo was your guy. So based on that, I was expecting some pretty wild costumes, and some of them did not disappoint. Like this guy here, who's meant to be a cook. I'm like, look at him. Like, what's his deal? I'm both fascinated and also somewhat terrified. But sadly, within this whole display of sketches that Archimboldo did for this mask, no vegetable knights battling fruit knight. But what we do get are incredibly ornate designs for the different elements of the mask, knights in extravagant outfits, and, my favourite, ladies with spears. So we do not exactly know who these women are supposed to represent exactly, but I would probably interpret them as possibly being Amazons, because Amazons were actually pretty popular as a subject of masks at the time, which very often included Greek and Roman mythological figures, fictional heroes, and actual historic characters as well. Rich and powerful people at court who were in a position to put on these masks basically wanted to demonstrate all the wealth and power at their disposal, and the way of doing that was also being able to associate themselves with these powerful figures from antiquity and who would have been kind of perpetuated throughout literature and art at the time. And one warrior woman figure in particular was particularly popular in the art and literature at the time, but also as a subject of these masks, and that was Amazon Queen Penthesilea. And she does actually make an appearance at the very extravagant Stirling tournament of 1594, except in this case she's not being portrayed by an actress, presumably part of a procession or a dance or a theatre piece, but within the joust itself, by one of the knights. in drag. So who is she? Well, the gun drag in question was Patrick Leslie, who was actually part of a wider jousting team who were reportedly all dressed as Amazon. And they were opposing other teams in their own themed outfits. Just so a little jousting, fancy dress situation. And you might think this is just a weird one-off. Like, you can't just kind of zero in on one night in one Amazon drag queen outfit and just assume this happens on a regular occurrence. But we actually do have a precedent at a tournament decades earlier in 1561, where diplomat Thomas Randolph reports on what competing jousting teams were wearing costume-wise. The one half like women and the other like strangers, in strange masking garments. We also have a case, even earlier than that, in the 13th century, that a certain Ulrich von Liechtenstein was going around different tournaments dressed as a woman and calling himself Lady Venus, which is the most drag queen name that I have ever heard. Just fantastic. Great. If any aspiring drag queen wants to borrow that name, go for it. You just have to mention that Ulrich von Liechtenstein did it first. So we do know that Ulrich's intentions were to honour a lady that he was obsessed with his drag queen jousting. Now, what do we make of our Amazon drag queen look in terms of intentions and just, wider context of this happening in the 16th century? And was this for comedic effect, in the kind of like transphobic, haha, a woman is dressed as a man? That concept, throw it in the bin. That was not as effective as I thought it would be. And I'm really in two minds about this, because Penthesilea wasn't your kind of panto, comedic relief, widow twanky type of character that you would really expect to be interpreted in that way. She was an important figure. She was actually part of this wider literary and artistic trope called the Nine Worthy Women, which was all about portraying these powerful women from across history and mythology who would have been capable military leaders and warrior women, and she was one of them. They were often represented with swords and in kind of awesome armor battle dress combos. So she definitely wasn't a figure that was not taken seriously. So I have some doubts about how tongue-in-cheek anybody like it would have been to dress up as her. Then again, a lot of these jousts are also about a sense of othering in the way in which they approach themes and costumes. Case in point with, Thomas Randolph's accounts of, one half of the team dressed like women and the other like strangers, which also actually corresponds to one of the opposing teams for the Amazon jousting team, which was dressed in a Turkish manner, which you can't imagine was done in the most culturally sensitive way. In the end, I think we can keep all these different interpretations open, but maybe one of the most logical explanations may also very well be linked to that original idea of male actors portraying women on stage, not with the necessary link to comedic effect, but also just simply because women weren't allowed to be on stage, and so somebody needed to portray the woman, which led to the whole idea of being dressed as a girl and drag in the first place. So again, if you wanted to represent Amazons as part of the wider themes of your masque and your tournament, and you just didn't unfortunately have a whole gang of women jousters available, it might have been the kind of attitude that somebody's got to do it, and this team will do it. We got to interpret these things in different ways and try and remove our own assumptions around gender and how these men would have felt about portraying femininity as part of these performances. But just as the concept of drag thankfully persisted throughout history beyond the stage or the tournament, so did jousting and specifically tilting. While these courtly extravagant masks were going on, tilting and running at the ring in particular were finding their audience across all social classes due to their flexibility in terms of setup and equipment. And that wasn't something that could just be limited to knights. Anybody could do it. And while the idea of courtly jousts faded away, at least outside of the Ren Fair circuit, these games continued in both informal and organised ways, with tilting as a staple of many a village fair in many countries across Europe, in ways that don't so much involve horses anymore, but could involve lots of different means of jousting transportation, such as a tractor, a lawnmower, piggybacking, or indeed the bicycle. So we're back to our lady on a bike, who is in fact doing her own version of tilting in a book from 1901, delightfully titled fancy cycling, showing Edwardians having the absolute time of their lives with bike tricks such as the butterfly dance, the knitting on wheels, the skipping, the hoop skipping, the riding through hoop, and the sizzling double side riding. Just gals being bicycle pals. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the knitting on the bicycle though, because that seems like the most dangerous one. Like, tilting is fine, no problem. I mean, you know, yes, you do have a sword, but you're holding it as one hand. The knitting's with two hands. On a bike. Couldn't be me. Please don't do this at home. But this seems to be gender balance fooling around on bikes, which I found pretty interesting. Which would make sense because only a decade before, the popularity of bicycles provided a new sense of freedom and literal mobility for lots of different women, while also allowing to prove themselves against men in a new sport. In the US, Annie Londonderry travelled around the world on wheels, following an alleged bet by two men that there was no way a woman could do it. And, you know, let's be honest, most people now believe that that bet part was actually completely fabricated by Annie to drum up some engagement before her big challenge that she just pretty much imposed herself. But a detail of the story that I do love is that she did set off for her world tour in a long skirt with a corset and a little pistol with a mother of pearl handle, which is just iconic. Very demure, very mindful. And her exploit reflected other women's growing passion for cycling as they were able to move out to the domestic sphere and find new affordable ways of travelling both long and short distances. But of course, that lady bike riding phenomenon is also accompanied by a whole nice little set of sexist assumptions around what women could and couldn't do, with claims that bikes were way too dangerous for ladies, but also that bikes could be damaging to women's moral character. Leading to one of my favourite vintage bicycle pictures ever, a woman on a bicycle stoically mowing down another woman without a single moment of hesitation, with the caption, "Does the bicycle make the woman cruel?" I'm just going to be honest with you, I think there was something else going on way before bicycles got involved. Of course, in the 19th century and early 20th century, this would also relate to a range of wider anxieties around women's roles, and women increasingly claiming activities that up until then were the main remit of men, as was the case for bicycles, and increasing questions and anxieties and tensions around their place around the home, especially as the fight for women's suffrage gained momentum. Because we all know what's next after stealing men's bikes. It's stealing men's clothes, stealing men's jobs, and stealing men's ladies. Which brings us back to drag, but with a lesbian drag king moment. Enacted by 19th century lesbian photographer Frances Benjamin Johnson, sporting moustache, next to a high wheeler. For Frances Benjamin Johnson and many other women, the bike was one of the attributes of the new woman. There's a woman with independence and self-reliance, fighting for her rights and fighting for her place outside of the home, and, you know, within the wider world. And just as many lesbians were part of this movement for the new women, so did many of them pick up a bike and ride it towards a better, gayer future. Which honestly is probably the best segue I could ever provide so that we can go on and talk about the expanded fictional badass version of this that would have made end-of-century lesbians everywhere swoon, which is lesbian motorcycle jousting. So join me in welcoming comics artist and writer Fell Hound to the channel for a little chat about her new comic, S.I.R. So happy to have you with us on the channel. I was wondering if you want to start by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and what your work's about.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Claire. Hello, my name is Belle, and I'm a writer and comic book artist. I'm currently writing and drawing a series called S.I.R, which is about motorcycle jousting. It stands for the Seismic Iron Clash Roulette. And yeah, it's got a lot of like shoujo manga vibes. It's got like insane sports anime vibes, and it's being published by Boom Studios. The premise of S.I.R is basically you've got Avery and Nico, who are estranged lovers, and they reunite at this fancy, prestigious, very expensive college known as Bridalham Academy. Basically, Bridalham Academy, it used to be a school of knights back in the 17th century, but obviously over time it became more academic. But what Avery discovers as she comes to the school is that the part where they keep the old knighthood tradition alive is in something called the Seismic Iron Clash Roulette, which is basically a massive motorcycle jousting ring that runs the school. And she finds out her girlfriend Nico is involved, and she's like, oh no. And in order to save their relationship, she needs to join this joust, save Nico and win the day. I am also a huge fan of lady knights, women in armor. So obviously I wanted to do something with knights and have a bunch of women hold fancy weapons.
Very
And
important.
yes. I am also a huge fan of like Utena and like Wish for Mercury and a lot of these like school dueling like animes. So I was like, it's always been my dream to sort of make my own version of that like school dueling genre. So this is kind of what S.I.R is about. It's like half my love of women nights, half my love of sports, and half my love of Utena. I'm just like everything I love about anime and weaponry and blood sport pulled into one.
And it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I absolutely love it when to save a relationship, you have to, put on some armor, grab a very fancy weapon, and, ride upon your noble steed, which in this case is a motorcycle. As you know, I've been looking at bicycle jousting, and I was just really interested in finding out, to what extent you were inspired by those kind of medieval jousting tournaments. Where did the motorcycles come into play?
S.I.R isn't like the first like piece of media to do motorcycle jousting. I did discover while making this that there is a movie called Night Riders, which is about like traditional, much more traditional medieval motorcycle jousting. And I think because of that, I did want to move away from that so that it wasn't exactly like Night Riders. But with S.I.R, I wanted to make it more insane. So instead of just like a traditional line joust and like, trying to hit the target, I bend the laws of physics a little bit. They just fly off ramps and they like go at speeds that we don't know. And they have like really funky weapons. And I just wanted to make it like sort of like an insane anime version of motorcycle jousting and not just like, I guess, like too traditional, because I didn't want to like impose on something that's already been done.
In the kind of design elements we've seen so far. And obviously the seismic Iron Clash roulette happens inside this kind of Colosseum, and you have these different names like Sir Valkyrie, but also Sir Ares, without spoiling too much. And there's all these different references in terms of mythology that come into play as well.
Yeah, we actually play, I don't want to spoil too much, but we do play more into that sort of Greek mythology aspect later on. The knights represented, I think it was important to me to have like, some riders, they look like they're in more traditional armors, but I also wanted like some riders to have more of like a modern street look. So it's like I wanted all the designs to look like every single rider sort of designed it themselves. So like the people who wanted more traditional like armors or wanted to present more like royally fancy armors, and the people who wanted more street level looks have like stuff that reflects their own personality in that way. So we do get a very eclectic mix of like, you've got like traditional armor and then like leather jackets. And I think it's just like a cool vibe to see all these like random designs meshed together in this giant Colosseum.
And it's really not far from what would have happened in kind of medieval and late period jousts of lots of people appearing in actual costumes to take part in these jousts. I love the different references to items that some knights are wearing. So, for example, Sir Valkyrie has a spear that's probably costs more than the motorbike, and I think it's Heathen who has the legendary Damascus armor. So I really love those little touches and little references. And I was wondering if you'd base down something in particular, or was it just kind of going back the idea of status and persona and how they would have wanted to represent themselves?
The fancy equipment you see on those riders, I think it does tie back a lot to status, because Bridal Helm Academy is a very, very expensive prestigious college. Tuition is like 40 grand a semester. So like these students have money. And this like seismic Iron Clash roulette is how they kind of flaunt their money. They like buy shiny weapons, shiny armor, shiny bikes, and they just like go ham in this arena. So it's basically like a rich man's betting sport. And having all those like shiny weapons just kind of like make you flaunt it better. And then you've got some people who are, somewhat more underprivileged. So they don't have that much shininess to their vehicles or their looks. And I just kind of want that reflected.
And what I loved as well in this first issue is that obviously I'm a big fan of women with swords. I'm not going to make it, I'm going to assume you're as well, but something we don't see that much in terms of, knighthood and obviously warrior women with traditional edged weapons that aren't guns is, of course, spears. And I feel as though in the first issue we see a lot of spears and a lot of these kind of more kind of unconventional weapons. And I just loved the designs for many of them, especially Sir Ares. Yeah, I think Spear for Sir Ares. So I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about what was your creative process behind designing those weapons, and if you had any kind of historic inspiration for them.
Yeah, so the main thing with the weapons is that they, I felt like they couldn't have like just like a massive sword, even though I
Mm.
wanted, because then, I wanted to like die, but like they still had to be some kind of like a pointy weapon so they could like push you off the bike. So some people's weapons are pointier than others. But basically everybody, I wanted the weapons to look varied enough so it looks like every rider designed it themselves and designed, the best way to get somebody else off the bike. And I wanted Sir Ares weapons to look, extra unique. So, minor spoilers for Sir, like Sir Ares uses like a giant like claw basically, and it just like clamps onto the opponents and it can push people off the bike, it can pull people off the bike. So I think that gives Sir Ares like an extra sort of edge and makes it look extra cool.
Yeah.
Oh, there's other weapons throughout. Like there's one person who just has like a giant club. Got more traditional spears. We've got some very fun weapons towards the end of the issue that I can't spoil yet. Basically, I just want to sort of like have fun with it without being too lethal.
Did you get inspired by actually going to see like sort of like, or are there specific sports that have that kind of confrontation elements that you've always enjoyed that kind of inspired you in writing the story?
I did used to play sports. To be honest, I liked playing sports for the sport, but when I played like competitive sports, I think I found it too competitive. Like people were not very nice.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I didn't enjoy. And I think with something like besides McGarren Clash Roulette, where it's like, you flaunt your money, people bet on you, you got to be like the best of the best. I think that definitely comes out. Any jealousy going on. And unfortunately, that's also something I experienced when I played competitive sports. So
the money and betting thing is really interesting as well, because it's kind of like what happens with a sport, like just beyond just a sportsmanship alone, like what are the different dynamics that come into play with that in terms of why you want people to win, and it might just be for quite selfish reasons in the end, not necessarily because you're enjoying the game. So I found that pretty interesting as well.
We gotta get layers. We can do sports, but we also gotta critique capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and what's the point of doing a queer motorcycle jousting comic if it isn't also to critique capitalism? I mean, honestly.
Yes.
On that note, I was really interested in knowing if you had to enter the seismic Iron Clash Roulette, what your persona would be. If you had anything in mind as a self-insert.
I feel like I put like all of the designs that I wanted to have like in the book for these other people.
Yeah.
But personally, I know my design would literally just be like wads of bubble wrap, like all bubble wrap. I'm going to wrap my helmet in bubble wrap. I'm a very squishy person. Like when I tried the longboard, like the first time I tried the longboard, I stepped on the wheel within 10 minutes and like broke my ankle. So like I don't even trust myself on a motorbike, let alone jousting. I think I'll just look like give me like the thickest foam bubble wrap you can find, just completely wrap in it, and then give me like, I don't know, like a battering ram just to give me a lick up.
You'd be so cautious. So let's have a protection on. I feel that. I mean, I do historical European martial arts, and every single time people are like, oh, that's so intense and badass. Like, yeah, but we do wear a lot of protection and a helmet and elbow pads and a very padded jacket. And, if you're playing with steel swords, you've got to be really, really careful. I'm really happy to know that you've put all the designs for the knights that you wanted to in the story. But is there that one design or that one weapon that you really love, but you just couldn't justify being in the story? Isn't kind of kill your darlings moment?
So to be honest, originally I am actually like in the process of redesigning a bunch of my old designs. So I'm trying to put all the like, because like while I was working on this book, I just like, oh, I think I can make them look even cooler. So I'm kind of incorporating all the designs that I wanted. One design that I did have to take out, or I will be taking out, is that originally I wanted one of the riders to have like a massive horse bike.
Oh,
Um, but then I thought about having to draw that horse bike, and I was like, you know what? I don't I don't want to do that to myself anymore. So I am going to redesign the horse bike. Sadly, the dreaded horse cycle will not be making it into S.I.R. But maybe we'll see the light of day.
in terms of the practicalities of drawing a bunch of motorbikes across 5 issues, it's unsound decision, very much so. And that's from somebody who's had to draw just one horse from multiple angles, maybe 10 times or so. So yeah.
Horses are so much harder because they have limbs. Like with bikes, you just have like maybe 2 wheels, but like 4 limbs and a tail along
Yeah,
that.
that is true. That is true. Are you saying that's why you chose the motorcycles for the comic and not horses?
Yeah, I mean, if I can get away with not drawing a horse in my comics like ever, I would love that. We'll see how far that goes.
Nice. What was the kind of progression level of having to learn to draw motorcycles?
So the progression level is that I had an extremely, extremely kind and talented friend who basically they're very good at Blender. So they basically just like 3D modeled a bunch of like custom bikes for me.
Nice.
They saved my life on this comic book.
God.
Because trying to draw motorcycles on like a billion different angles
Yeah.
would have probably killed me. So shout out to Cody Okamoto who blendered all the motorcycles for me.
Yes, amazing. Honestly, I feel like in terms of comics artistry and having to draw the same thing over and over again. I mean, I saw that in your notes for Commander Rao, which anybody watching, please go and get your heart broken and read Commander Rao followed by And We Love You. I just reread them this afternoon and struggled to keep it together. But what you were saying in those notes was, yeah, like you've got to take into account when you're designing something that you're going to be drawing it over and over again. So I really, like the balance in the designs you had for Knights. As for the motorcycles, between this is going to be, elaborate as hell and show somebody's persona, but also you have to draw it over and over again.
Yeah. So, like, one thing about the motorcycles is that to make my life easier, I did base like all of them just off like dirt bikes. As I mean, in my head, I was like, it's like in close space, dirt bikes are better and like more like agile in that space.
Yeah.
Like you don't like 100 kilometers an hour on a racing bike. So I think just like having like one type of bike did make my life a little easier. You gotta work smart, not hard.
Exactly. Just a tip for all you aspiring comic artists out there. If you had to summarize the comic in one sentence of like, why should you read this comic? Like, what are you going to get from reading this comic? What would it be?
If you like angsty gays, shoujo manga, and blood sport, crazy anime comics,
Yes.
or to see a motorcycle jesting really loudly, which is sometimes what I do when people ask me in person.
Motorcycle jousting.
Yes, until they get in their heads and it's like, well, I got to find out what motorcycle jesting is about.
I know. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it is awesome. And it's amazing. That's what it is. Really looking forward to reading the second issue and the next and the next and next. You've written obviously so many comics, but is there any comic that you'd like to shout out?
Yeah, so my friends at Dauntless Stories, Marcus and Brant, they do a lot of really cool anthologies. They have one running right now. I don't know if by the time this goes up, the anthology will be funded or not, but it's called Tell Them of Us. It's basically about like the world is over and humanity has to tell a bunch of stories onto what their legacy would be after the world is over. Stories about kind of what you leave behind, the legacy of humanity. It's by a bunch of like super talented people. If it is funded by now, yay! And if it's not, hopefully they'll relaunch it and you can remember it, follow down stories, and fund it next time. Another comic I would love to shout out is also a webcomic I've been really loving lately. It's called Keeping Time by Cody Okamoto. Yeah, it's about it's like a queer musical sad drama. Cody describes it as like a bummer gay romance. But it's wonderful. It's beautiful. The vibes are impeccable. It's one of my favorite comics out right now. Everybody go check it out. I'm gonna take a moment to shout out my wonderful collaborators on S.I.R, though. I forgot. So it's written and drawn by me, but it's also colored by the super talented Eleanor Bruni. It's lettered by Becca Carey, who also does like Radiant Black, and look at those colors. They're beautiful.
Yeah, like they're absolutely gorgeous. It's those things in comics that you don't realize, makes such a difference and such an incredible impact, and like how the tone shifts between the arrival at school and being at the Colosseum. It's incredible colors.
I'm really excited. I really dig the team. And our editor Elizabeth Bry, who actually for the color scheme, she was like, "Oh, let's go for like a Sailor Moon like pop shoujo vibe." I was like, "That's excellent, beautiful." Yes.
Absolutely. Where can people find you? Very important in these times of social media collapsing onto itself.
Oh, thank you. I am everywhere. I am on all the platforms that you have heard about, probably even the ones you haven't heard about. I am on, Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Just look up Fell Hound. You can find me on my website, fellhoundart.com. I also have a newsletter. I'm on Tumblr. I'm on TikTok. I'm on everything.
Glad to see that people are still on Tumblr. It does keep surviving. Amazing. I'll link all that below. But thank you so much for joining us and talking about S.I.R. Everybody, go and get your copy of S.I.R. And also pre-orders are very important. If you really love a comic, pre-order it, and that shows everyone that it's loved and it deserves, it deserves all your appreciation. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and our very first interview on the channel was Fell Hound. Please check out her comic and order your own issue of S.I.R. And please let me know in the comments down below what your own S.I.R persona would be, or what your patented Edwardian bite trick's name would be. While you wait for your copy of S.I.R to arrive, you can also check out my podcast, Bustles and Broadswords, all about historical sword fighting ladies throughout history. And you can also check out my own webcomic, Girls School of Knighthood, which yes, also has a little bit of Utena, extravagant knights, school vibes going on with sword fighting and lesbian dramatics. Stay safe, sword lovers and motorcycle lesbian jousting lovers, and see you in another video.